What is up, fantasy people? Welcome back to the True North Fantasy Pod. I am Travis Seal, coming live from a secret location within the True North Fantasy lair, as always. We are presented by Monkey Knife Fight, and sitting directly to my left, my on-screen right, is the man, the myth, the legend, co-hosting and West Coasting, Tyrell McLaughlin. How you doing tonight, buddy?
Living the dream. Yeah, living the dream. Is it camera right or stage right? How do the kids don't say
I don't
stage
know.
right anymore?
I guess not.
No,
we're not sitting on the stage, but it feels like a pretty slick little setup we got, buddy, because I must say we've got a new little equipment setup going on, and we are thoroughly enjoying ourselves. So hopefully it can provide a better experience for our listeners, because it's definitely a really good experience for us. This is fun.
Yep, hot mics, new hot mics.
Yeah, beam, 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 beam. But
New mic goofing.
anyway, now that it's stopped raining, for any of our audio listeners, I was just making it rain there for a sec. Sorry. Anybody who wants to check out our stuff, please make sure you go to truenorthffb.com. Check us out on the socials at truenorthffb on Twitter and on the gram. And yeah, just check out all the work. Everyone's doing some really good work. Make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel, because we have 4 weekly shows happening right now, and the boys are putting in some really, really good work. So Sons of DFS, I think obviously it's winding down a little bit for them because DFS season is getting close to over. The Gold Jacket Pod, they're going to keep her rolling all off season as well as the point after. So we're really excited for the content schedule for True North Fantasy Football. Going to be a really big 2022 tie.
Absolutely. And of course, as always, fantasypoints.com is the best resource everybody needs to make sure their subscription is in full effect. Heading into this off season, they have a wicked 2022 early bird special on right now that runs through the Super Bowl, I believe, and then our promo code will be back in action. But everyone should have a fantasypoints.com subscription as it is. It's the best information from the best people who are invested in the product. And yeah, Jake Tribby, one of their newest, youngest, least household names at this point, but he was I think recently nominated for an FSWA award. So it just the litany of accolades that these guys have accumulated, and now they're all in one place, and you don't have to follow them around. It's really an all-stop shop for all things fantasy, and the best fantasy players in the world are using this as one of their top resources, and you should be too.
Absolutely, you should. And just a little shout out to the Fantasy Points Media Group to top that off, Ty. A lot of good work going on in the media group, some new brands coming on. So welcome to them, and go check it out on the Fantasy Points website. You can find it under affiliates, I believe, on their website, and you can see all the shows in there. All great people and great shows that they're doing. So thanks to them, and it's been cool to get to know them. And yeah, Ty on the video is pointing to that new Fantasy Points Media Group logo on the overlay. And if you saw that intro video, we did a little bit of video editing and got that motherfucker on there. Sorry, Ty, I'm just getting really, really excited here. That language is not a representation of Fantasy Points. We love them. But Ty, I'm going to get into the Epi rundown. I'm just so fired up with our new setup, Ty. Like, even before the show, I was saying, like, I am so fired up. It's it's 10 o'clock here in Victoria, British Columbia, 10 p.m. And I'm just hitting my stride. I can tell you that much.
Second wind coming over here.
Absolutely. It is a little bit windy outside, actually. But tonight, Ty, it is wide receiver week. We are getting into the wide receiver State of the Union. And I'll be completely honest, Ty, we had enough content on this show sheet for about 4 epis. So we're going to get through as much as we possibly can tonight. And a lot of this stuff is going to come out on the True North pod throughout the offseason. So it's not all imperative that we hit it all now, Ty, but we're going to hit as much as we can because we got lots and we're excited to dive into it.
Yeah, and make sure you're following us on Twitter, because a lot of the data and all that kind of stuff we will be tweeting out throughout the offseason, of course, even though we're all, of course, still enjoying NFL playoffs.
Oh, man, yeah, we're getting down to conference championship week, so it's going to be exciting football.
It's refreshing, I'll say, too, is like we're all dialed into fantasy so much, and it can be so X's and O's driven. Like, it's a very analytical process. It's like, as much math, and it's just nerdy stuff.
Totally.
But we still love football to its core, and the real life football playoffs is, especially once it gets down to just 4 teams and there's not as much DFS stuff, or you might be out of your playoff challenges, whatever. It is really enjoyable to just watch some good frickin' football.
No implications.
This time of the year. Yeah.
No implications. We can just enjoy these offenses and obviously some defensive play as well. But I like the refreshing faces with Joe Burrow and Matt Stafford in the conference championships. San Francisco was there a few years back, but they've got lots of new faces. Obviously Mahomes and the Chiefs, but we got to get used to them being there. And the Bills were very, very close to being in their spot as well. So we're just seeing a bunch of new teams roll over, new exciting offenses and stuff. And so we're excited to talk about them, Ty. We saw a lot of these wide receivers that we're going to talk about in some of those games this past week. And it's going to be fun. Wide receiver is such a plentiful position. We talked last week about the running back dead zone on the running back episode. And that's a really nice spot where you can hit some of these breakout wide receivers. And we're trying to target those guys and kind of identify who those guys are going to be. We're going to talk, you got some hit rate stuff, which I'm really excited to get into. And we're going to talk a little bit of free agents as well. So tons of players, but we're going to dive right into these free agents. Ty, last week for running backs, we did the running back needy teams. We're not necessarily going to do that for the wide receivers this week, just because running back, you can kind of target those a little bit better. Whereas with wide receiver, almost every team is probably going to add a wide receiver at some level of the depth chart. So it's really exciting to dive into these free agents because some of these guys might turn out to be fantasy relevant for us sooner rather than later next season when they weren't on their previous team. So just going to dive into some of these free agents. I kind of tiered them out a little bit, Ty. So we're going to mainly dive into the kind of the first tier, so to speak. And then I'm just going to kind of rattle off some of the other ones because there are still some interesting names out there. One that I'm just looking at on the sheet right now, shout out to our buddy Ian Hart. It's Auden Tate. He is a deeper guy, but Ian is a huge Auden Tate truther. We like him too on the True North pod. But let's go up a couple echelons here, Ty. We're going to start right at the top. One of both of our favorite wide receivers, actually, and that would be Chris Godwin, leaving his post as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call them, coming out of a really, really good situation. So I'm curious what you think about Godwin. Like, I know you've been a big fan in the past. Has any of that changed for you at all? Is the Brady factor, do you think he could be worse off with another quarterback? What's your take on Godwin, and what are you doing with him in your dynasty leagues?
Yeah, there's definitely like a wide range of outcomes in terms of his quarterback play. All this stuff is up for debate. I don't think he's going to fall very far, though, no matter what happens, because Chris Godwin is that talented. Wide receiver 6 overall in points per game this year, wide receiver 7 overall when he went down for the year in week 15, I believe. This all despite ranking outside the top 40, by the way, in weighted opportunity. So I really think the only knock on Rod God is the failure to stay healthy here. I think he's missed games in 3 straight seasons now, and not giving us much come fantasy playoffs in each of the past 3 seasons, not available twice. But yeah, I just love Chris Godwin. So normally a wide receiver this talented would never hit the open market, but Tampa Bay has some serious cap constraints. Their available cap space according to Over the Cap is about what Chris Godwin would command on the open market, I think, in his AAV, average annual salary. And the Bucs have just a buffet of expiring contracts beyond Chris Godwin, Alex Kappa, Ryan Jensen on that offensive line. I think Kappa's due for a major pay raise.
Yeah,
there.
He was one of the highest graded guards in the league this year, I believe.
Yeah, and he's just been
played every snap too, I think. Yeah.
And then you have a bunch of guys on the defense. They got some secondary guys like Whitehead, Carlton Davis. You got JPP, Ndamukong Suh. All those guys are free agents, and there's some skill guys who could be gone too. You think of Antonio Brown, seems all but certainly gone from Tampa
He's already
Bay.
gone.
So yeah, we talked about Leonard Fournette on the running back episode and during the season. Fournette has been a buy candidate in Dynasty this whole time because he could easily return to Tampa Bay.
Best case Ontario, if you ask me.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure his season has been so spectacular that squads are lining up down the block to shell out a multiple year contract to him. So if the Bucs try to run it back, so to speak, Fournette could be a big part of that. Maybe that takes months to play out, to unfold, not unlike like it did last offseason for Fournette and the Bucs. And there's expiring contracts at the tight end position too. I think OJ Howard's up this year. Rob Gronkowski's that remains to be seen.
Yeah, that's right.
A real possibility that Chris Godwin just walks, with a franchise tag really hindering the Bucs' ability to really retain other guys. And even if he stays, like you said, alluded to, we have Tom Brady to worry about. We have to bake in the idea that Bruce Arians could retire again.
Jesus.
So yeah, do you think Chris Godwin's a top 12 wide receiver in Dynasty going forward? Like, how much do you think we're going to covet this Buck situation for the weapons in the passing game in Dynasty leagues with, some of the ambiguity here that comes along with it?
That's the Tom Brady expiry date, right? It's like, it's worrisome to invest so heavily into a guy who, he saw that production with Jameis Winston. We can give him that. He didn't do it all with Tom Brady, but I mean, Jameis Winston is a one-of-a-kind quarterback, and he plays very nicely into the hand of an elite fantasy wide receiver. So it is hard for me to put him inside the top 12. I'm actually trying to open my Dynasty rankings this very second, and they just aren't opening for me right now, Ty. But I think I have him just right around the top 15 here for Dynasty wide receivers. But I think, like, if he goes back to Tampa and you want to have him in your top 12, that's totally fine too, because like a 2-year window, if you're assuming that Tom Brady is there, then yeah, I think Chris Godwin is that. Chris Godwin, he scored the 9th most red zone fantasy points of any wide receiver this year, and that just kind of alludes to the fact that he's efficient. He can do it anywhere on the field. And that was with Mike Evans scoring the 5th most points in the red zone among fantasy wide receivers. So
who do you have higher between those two in your rankings, if you're able to?
I have Chris Godwin higher, actually. I have him as my Dynasty. You know what? I do have him inside right now. And that would be with the assumption of Tom Brady for a couple more seasons. I have Godwin at wide receiver 10. I have Mike Evans just a couple spots behind him at about 14, 15 area.
I think we could agree. Like, Mike Evans might be more confined by his offense. Like, he might be more tied to his situation than Chris Godwin, who, like, I think Mike Evans needs a plethora of air yards and end zone targets, like both of them. Whereas Chris Godwin's just he's far more versatile, in my opinion. He can do it all. But deep receiving work after the catch, he's pretty electric. In fact, I think over the last 3 seasons, here are the yards after the catch leaders. If I bring it up here, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin. Since 2019, actually, Godwin averages about 82 yards receiving per game, which is 6th best amongst wide receivers, and a top 10 wide receiver in total points per game in PPR over that span. So yeah, he's a top 10 wide receiver for me in Dynasty. I think he would quickly acclimate to wherever he landed in free agency too, or even in a new system with a new quarterback in Tampa Bay. Like, I think, I have guys right around him like A.J. Brown. I think people would take A.J. Brown over him. I would make a deal where I'm acquiring Chris Godwin plus for A.J. Brown in Dynasty. Those are the kind of moves I like to make. Maybe try and sweeten the pot with a new Hopkins who's going to be 30 next season and try and get a Chris Godwin, things like that. Yeah, totally. No, I like it. I have him just above Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore, T. Higgins. I think Godwin is straight Bowla. Going to move on to the next guy. A lot less versatile than is Chris Godwin, but showed a lot more versatility than we expected out of him, and that would be Mike Williams in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Talk about a great system for longevity with Justin Herbert in the fold. Keenan Allen is getting up there in years while still producing. Like, this team's going to be ripe for a fresh wide receiver 1 in the coming few years with an elite quarterback already at the helm. So I think it's a great situation. Mike Dubs, do you think that was kind of a flash in the pan 4th-year breakout, or do you think he can keep it going for that 5th year? They obviously didn't pick up the option on him. He's going to be looking to get paid. It's going to be hard to see him getting heavily paid out there, but I think he brought a lot more to the table than we had seen from him in his 3 previous seasons, Ty. Yeah, he remains kind of an anomaly. Like, he doesn't do a lot of the things that I want a wide receiver to, like, that I want to rely on, and so a lot of it does come down to the offense. Even looking at his season, like, we definitely want him to stay a Charger, that's for sure. Oh, yeah. We would love for them to work something out. But looking at, because Jalen Guyton's a free agent too, so they definitely, we're going to be interested in a Chargers wide receiver 2 on this team. Maybe we'll talk about some Josh Palmer, but JP. It really was a tale of 2 seasons, sort of. Like, wide receiver 1 overall ahead of Cooper Kupp after 5 games this season in half-point PPR scoring for Mike Williams. He was like the wide receiver 29 though from week 6 on. So what Mike Williams are you getting? He had over 22 PPR points in 4 of the first 5 games, a feat he failed to accomplish once over the next 10 games of the fantasy regular season. And definitely just a boomer bust season. Like, 65% of his points came in just those 5 games. Those 5 games were his only wide receiver 1 performances. He had just 8 top 24 finishes. So And like there was 7 games this season where Mike Williams had under 10 points per game and or under 10 PPR points. So he failed to reach double digits, way more than a couple times more than he was even a wide receiver 1. So he remains like what he always has been throughout his career, from week to week, from year to year in his career, just kind of an anomaly, but with a boomer bust element to his game, with a ton of promise. And, if we want what we saw in 2021 to continue, then Mike Williams dynasty owners are praying that he stays in town. There's no doubt about it, because this season looks like the outlier at this stage of the game. Like after averaging under 11.5 points per game in PPR in each of the previous 3 seasons, he soared to over 15 points per game this year. And it really 100% comes down to this offense, what we saw from Justin Herbert and company, like 4th best in yards, 5th highest scoring offense, 5th in completed air yards. The Chargers also were in a tier of their own along with the Buffalo Bills in play action pass attempts and yards. I'm a big fan of that and think it correlates to fantasy success. So Mike Williams had 21% of the target share in this potent offense, about 30% of the air yards, almost 30% of the end zone targets as well, 14 end zone targets, and he was the only Charger with double-digit end zone targets. So, and maybe some positive touchdown regression to point out in that area of the field too, because only 5 guys had more end zone targets this season in all of football, but 21 guys scored more end zone touchdowns than big Mikey Dub. And there's a lot to factor in here, because if he's back as a Charger, you have to think Keenan Allen continues to climb towards that age apex. And you mentioned Jalen Guyton could be on his way out in odd man fashion, I think, So, and I think, by the way, this leaves the sneaky buy, the guy I alluded to off the top, is Canada's own Josh Palmer.
Canadian. Yeah, no, I like it, man. I think Josh Palmer, fills the Mike Williams role very nicely and probably adds a little bit of a plus to it with a little bit more of a diverse skill set than what Mikey Dubs has. And I'm totally with you. Like Mike Dubs' best case Ontario is to go back to the Chargers. He knows that situation can feed his type of profile, and we don't necessarily know that for other teams. So yeah, I think that's really well put there. And I think it's not to say that Mike Williams can go elsewhere and not be good, because if he goes to a quarterback that can put it up, like if he goes and he's the wide receiver 2 for the Chiefs or something like that, obviously we've been salivating over the wide receiver 2 for the Chiefs for a long time, and it hasn't necessarily panned out. Thanks a lot, Mecole.
Well, the wide receiver 2 there is either Tyreek or Kelsey.
Yeah, those 2 guys actually have soaked up over 50% of the team's targets in the past 4 or 5 years straight, which is pretty bonkers. But let's go to LA. I want to keep this rolling through the free agents. Like I said, Ty, buttload of guys to get through tonight, so we got to start flying here. Speaking of buttloads.
Yeah, well, these are some of the toughest guys here that we're talking about already off the top.
Speaking of buttloads, Odell Beckham Jr., the Cleveland Steamer himself. Shout out to our friends at Viridian Global. If you want to get some deadly merch, True North merch is on Viridian Global. They also have an Odell shirt that is called the Cleveland Steamer because Odell's into that. What a little surge with friggin' LA, hey? 6 games he went with LA. We're not going to dive into the whole Bitcoin thing because he lost a shitload of money on his contract by taking some of it as Bitcoin.
Yeah, buy your own Bitcoin, kids.
Yeah.
That's the lesson. Take whatever you get and then go buy your Bitcoin.
Yeah, don't take your contracts in Bitcoin, folks. Absolutely not. But anyway, another guy whose best case Ontario is probably to stay where he's at. But then if you look at it, he's got Robert Woods to contend with, who should be coming back from injury. What's your take on Odell? I think he probably goes somewhere else because somebody will give him a little bit more money and probably offer him those wide receiver 1 looks where you won't get that with Cooper Kupp and potentially even with Robert Woods. So I think just knowing kind of Odell, he wants to be the alpha somewhere, and I don't think it'll necessarily work out unless he's not seeing the market that he thought he would see. But what's your take on Odell hitting free agency, and are you excited for this?
I think he's going to be a sexy name on the market. Is Odell Beckham an elite wide receiver 1 for a team? I think that's way up for debate. I think that definitely remains to be seen in the last couple of years. There's no doubt about it. I don't think he's back as a Ram. There's almost no way he can be. The Rams are just, in one of the worst cap situations in football. And yeah, you mentioned Robert Woods. I think that plays a big part. Van Jefferson certainly took another step in his career arc this season, and Cooper Kupp is dominating. So, the Rams also, in my opinion, erroneously spent that 3rd round pick on Tutu Atwell. Well, maybe he gets more involved next year, or maybe the Rams dip their toe into the 2022 wide receiver class, at the draft.
Second round.
But I totally agree that OBJ could be a very sexy name in free agency. The question is, what OBJ are you getting? He had 35 touchdowns during his first 3 seasons in the NFL. He scored 21 times through the air in 5 seasons since then. And if you pace everything out per 17 games, because that's what we have to do now, over the past 5 years now, OBJ is averaging 78 catches for 1,041 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. That's what his 17-game paced out schedule, stats would look like. Compared to his first 3 seasons paced out for 17 games, OBJ averages looks like this: 114 catches for over 1,600 yards and 14 touchdowns. And to be honest, touchdowns were the total catalyst this year for the resurgence with the Rams in 2021, because Odell hadn't scored a freaking touchdown heading into his Week 10 debut with the Rams, but he scored in 5 of the following 6 games, despite seeing just 6 end zone targets, according to PFF, during that span. And even looking into season overall, he didn't post a single 100-yard receiving game with the Browns or the Rams. OBJ has now gone 33 straight games without having 90 yards receiving in a game. That's more than 2 full seasons, or I guess not anymore in this 17-game era, but
I don't even know
that
anymore.
is bad. That's not good, Bob. And actually, OBJ is just, that's quite the anti-streak, let's put it that way. And he's averaging under 40 yards receiving this year with both teams, the Rams and the Browns. So I just think I'm in the firm camp that OBJ isn't the same OBJ we fell in love with years back. Having said that, if he's willing to play for chump Bitcoin change, I guess we could call it. But if he's willing to take a haircut or something, that's what I worry about, is he's going to try and go somewhere and be a number 1, and it just might not work out because of the situation. But if he could land in a situation with good quarterback player in an advantageous system, or both, I think of a team like Arizona, you know what I mean? He'd look pretty fucking good across from Nuke in the desert. AJ Green,
God.
Christian Kirk, both free agents. So
Oh.
I think OBJ is very landing spot dependent. I don't think he's back with the Rams. But I also don't think he's a buy in Dynasty. I think he's probably a sell.
I think you're totally right, especially because, like you said, he scored 5 touchdowns in his first 6 games with, was it 5 of his first 6, I think he said, with the Rams. People are going to be looking at that and thinking Odell's back, baby. And yeah, you definitely do that. I like Odell, and I don't mind, if he's producing well, I don't mind having him on my teams as a wide receiver too. But like you said, it hasn't been there. He didn't have one game this season, or he had one game, with more than 30 yards after the catch. And he's got games where he's, got 9, 8, 7, 6 targets. And Odell used to be the guy who took the slant to the house all the fucking time. So yeah, I'm with you. He's not necessarily that. He would really need an ideal situation like Los Angeles to produce to that level. And even at that point, I think he would probably be overproducing where he's at in his career. So I think you laid a lot of that stuff out really, really nice, Ty. That was some decent stuff on ODB. That not getting 100-yard game streak is pretty wild for Odell, because you'd think he was just a machine.
Hopefully he breaks it this week in the playoffs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even you look at his yards per route run time, just having a look, 1.41 yards per route run this year, steadily declined over the past 4 years.
Yeah.
After a rookie 2.75 and a sophomore 2.45 yards per route run, which is elite stuff. Really so stuff. Gonna move along here, Ty. This guy is a bit of an enigma for me. Somebody who we've seen some incredible flashes from. We had some high hopes coming into this season in an extremely dynamic offense, and that would be Michael Gallup. Just a side note, he signed with the Detroit Lions in a Madden franchise that we have, and he moved into wide receiver 1 status in the league. So maybe that's a sign of things to come for Michael Gallup in the future, Ty. I think this guy has a lot of the tools to be able to do that if he goes into a good situation. Not advocating for Detroit whatsoever, but what do you think about Michael Gallup's prospects in the future? Do you think he leaves Dallas, or do you think they maybe give Amari Cooper the boot and bring Michael Gallup back into the Lone Star State?
Yeah, I think he might have. I think he could definitely hit the market and get more money than he can get staying in Dallas. So we'll see what happens with Kellen Moore and stuff like that. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle in Dallas in that passing game. But I might have fell too hard for Michael Gallup last year. I'll admit that. I don't think it was bad process. I mean, this offense certainly delivered in Dallas. And, you mentioned yards per route run. Michael Gallup's a good guy to look at. His yards per route run was 1.18 this season. It was above it was above 1.3, but below 1.4 in both his rookie and sophomore campaigns. And then 2020, Gallup was up over 2 yards per hour on like 2.16 or something. So unfortunately, that season looks like the outlier at this stage. And for fantasy, he's just really had a few big games over the past couple of years now with some injuries mixed in. So Gallup probably ends up as a casualty in Dallas, I would say. That might be the only way that they can keep Amari Cooper in the mix and still have the ability to do other things. But I think Michael Gallup ends up as a complementary piece at best somewhere else, maybe even a one-dimensional contested catch kind of guy. He was actually one of the worst wide receivers in fantasy points scored over expectation in 2021, and was actually pretty bad in 2020 as well, much to my surprise. So definitely fading pretty hard on Michael Gallup.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of neutral. Like I said, he's a bit of an enigma to me, right? And so he's not necessarily a guy who I would be going out and trying to acquire. Definitely, if somebody wanted to throw some offers for me for the prospects of him going out there and being a top 20 wide receiver, I'm going to be entertaining those all day. But I'm still not necessarily sure what to think on Michael Gallup, because like you, I was looking forward to this season. I thought we were going to learn a lot about what he could do on the chance he moves on to another team to be in a more prominent role. But I mean, it's not to say like a more prominent role in another offense might not necessarily be better than, a secondary role in Dallas, depending on the offense that he goes to. So that's why I'm just having a bit of a hard time with him. I would probably sell if I could, and I would not be going out to acquire some Michael Gallup right now, but we could be putting our foots in our mouths because this is a talented player who you never really know. Okay, so next couple guys, Ty. These guys got banged up this past season, and I'm just going to start kind of humming a little bit because we've got lots more to get through here. Will Fuller and Juju Smith-Schuster. Obviously, Will Fuller went to Miami, and he was looking for a fat season, fat with a PH. He didn't necessarily get that. Jalen Waddle kind of slid in and stole his role there. And Will Fuller's hitting free agency again without a great season under his belt, which is what he was hoping to get this past year. So why don't we start on Will Fuller, Ty? I know that you have loved the boomness of Will Fuller in the past. Quintessential best ball guy, right?
No. Quintessential guy with IR spots.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so what do you like? Do you think he can bounce back? Because he's shown a lot more versatility than the deep threat stuff that he was showing earlier in his career. But I personally have not been a big fan of Will Fuller. I can't remember. I'd have to go look at like 45 show sheets back, but there was something where like he scored like 70 or not 70, that's high, but like 50% of his fantasy points in like 5 games in his career with those big boom games, and like all of his other games are below 12 PPR points or something like that. So I'm not a big fan of Will Fuller, but I'm curious to hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree that, like, I know what splits you're talking about, and I agree, but there's not many players who can deliver 40-point fantasy games.
True.
And
give me Tyler Lockett instead, right?
I'm going to be overweight on Will Fuller in 2022. I have a horrible feeling. Like, I know he has to learn a new playbook. I know he was attached to Deshaun Watson for his glory games in Houston, and I know those games can only happen if Will Fuller's on the fucking field and he's not injured, right? But in his career, in games where he's seen 5 targets or more, he averages almost 15 points per game in PPR, which would have been top 20 wide receiver in 2021. And it's not a small sample size. Like, Will Fuller has seen 5+ targets in 41 of 55 games played in the NFL. So, yeah, definitely has a massively wide range of outcomes in every way for him as a free agent right now. Like, we don't want him to go back to Miami tethered to Tua. That's not ideal. We would love to see him somewhere with a quarterback who has a strong arm, like a system who employs a lot of play action would just be awesome. In Dynasty, I'm still ranking this guy as a back-end wide receiver forward. And, like, I think he remains a player who offers a ceiling you just cannot find that late in a fantasy draft, especially at the wide receiver position where most of the hits go inside the top 24 of the position. So I think you have to factor in roster construction, of course. You don't want to build in too much volatility or instability at the wide receiver position, but to give a sense of where I have them, like, I think I'll take guys like Gabe Davis, Brendan Ayuk, Rashad Bateman easily ahead of Will Fuller. But I think I'd take a shot on Will Fuller over somebody like Mecole Hardman or DJ Chark, guys like that. So, yeah, I think Will Fuller kind of makes sense in seasonal leagues, in a lot of dynasty leagues, so long as there is IR spots, right? Because his ADP will really be suppressed. And, yeah, he's just going to be team dependent, avoid in best ball. Like, don't draft injury-plagued players in best ball. And Will Fuller seems to be one of the few actually injury-prone players. We don't like to throw that tag around, follow Edwin Porras on Twitter.
Yeah, it's been kind of a rough go for Will Fuller trying to stay on the field. You never wish for a guy to stay off the field. That's not what I'm saying while I'm hating on him, but it's just not a guy that I like to have on my fantasy rosters. Talk about Juju a little bit here, Ty. He's obviously with your Pittsburgh Steelers. Was with your Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going to have some turnover on that roster as well, so we never know what's going to happen there. He could end up going back there. He loves the city. He's always rocking the gear on his Insta and shit, but what do you think he brings to the table, like, for whatever team? Do you think he brings more than like a 4-yard ADOT? Yeah. Semi after the catch, you know what I mean? Like, he hasn't had those historic after the catch numbers like he had his first couple seasons. Obviously, he didn't have an AB putting up historic numbers across from him. But Juju, man, I love Juju, and I think he brings a lot more to the table than that kind of short target slot guy. I think he's got some size to do a little bit of downfield work. If he's in the slot, put him in the seam, get him doing some work after the catch still. He does have that trait. But, I've seen him do work on the outside and make some nice catches when he's had some tight coverage and stuff like that. So I want to see Juju flourish, and I think there's just too much uncertainty in Pittsburgh with the quarterback situation, which could go away at the drop of a hat because that's an organization that wants to stay relevant. So I don't think that they're just going to tank it. So keep your eyes peeled on that one, kids. But what's your thoughts on Juju as a player? Does he need a perfect situation?
Yeah, I think he does. Like, I have him buried in my dynasty rankings. I've always had like a little bit of a chasm between my
Juju.
rankings and ECR.
You hate him.
And I've certainly taken the W on that for the most part, and I bought him in his sophomore season too. Like, I got some of the across from Antonio Brown stuff. I don't think anybody saw his rookie season coming out of the gate, but like you alluded to, it was predicated almost entirely on historic yards after the catch numbers that have just completely disappeared while he's been in this one-dimensional passing game with such a low average depth of target based on the offense, the release time from Ben Roethlisberger. But it's also kind of put a spotlight on, if defenses are focusing on him, he's really not able to do anything. If there's not an Antonio Brown across from him, he might struggle. So I admit, as always, I have him just fucking buried in my dynasty rankings right now. Like,
how far?
In a tier with guys like Corey Davis, Tyler Boyd,
my
wide
God.
receivers like that. So
oh my God,
I think of him as like a wide receiver 4, and I think because like he could easily outproduce his ADP, or at least where I have him ranked. He could finish as the wide receiver 26 or whatever. I just don't see this guy having a big ceiling is my problem. If he stays in Pittsburgh, I'll have 0 shares too. The team is getting less pass heavy. The quarterback play will be even worse. Juju's ADOT is just historically low. The efficiency is just brutal. And the Steelers are just a one-dimensional pass game, like I mentioned at times, and namely when they're targeting Juju Smith-Schuster. And yeah, just that yards after the catch just not being there. It's just really, we fell in love with the rookie and sophomore season. I mean, people really fell in love too. Like, he was like how the mighty have fallen. He was a top.
I'm still smitten.
Pick in like startups though.
Yeah.
Like
that was wild. Yeah.
So outside of like a dynamite landing spot, I think Juju is just a super sell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
for
if
sure.
we're taking like pennies on the dollar compared to return, we could have got a couple years ago in a dynasty league.
See, I don't think I'm doing that. I think like at that point you just wait until he lands somewhere and then just build off the hype of that and sell him at that point. You know what I mean? Because I think you're getting peanuts for him right now, and I'd probably, you just hate Juju, man. It's brutal. Wide receiver 4, that's rough. I got him at wide receiver 36 right now.
I saw what the league thought of him last offseason. Like
I guess
for the
so.
record, like he might go back to Pittsburgh because he could have gone to the Chiefs last year if he wanted to. He just decided to go back to Pittsburgh for some reason. He could be playing football right now. But he decided to go back to Pittsburgh, and it's because he really just had no offers. He had 1 year, like $8 million offers last year. I know there was some cap constraints and all that bullshit, but I just don't think the league sees him as like this X wide receiver or anything.
Yeah, no,
or even a strong number 2. Like, I don't even think teams see him as like a strong number 2.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, it remains to be seen. We're definitely going to find out this season because the proof's going to be in the pudding for him. He might not necessarily have that safety net of going back to the Steelers like he did, so he might have to settle for that Will Fuller style deal, right? And bet on himself. But that's interesting that we've got opposing views, and I like one of your Steelers guys, Ty. It's going to be an interesting one to see pan out. Next guy on the list here, but we're going to talk about him in a little bit here. Allen Robinson, rough season, but he's going to be a free agent himself. DJ Chark, Ty, you touched on him, and it seems like you have him buried as well. I have him as my dynasty wide receiver 42. I think you had him in like that back end wide receiver 40.
I don't even think I
wide
have him as a
receiver
top
4
50
area.
guy. I'm
Really?
not sure I have any Jaguars wide receivers top 50 in dynasty rankings, to be completely honest.
But DJ Chark may not be a Jaguars wide receiver after the season. But that's, I think this is a guy that definitely will need a good situation himself. He definitely needs a strong arm quarterback who's going to put the ball up for him. I think he's shown a little bit more of that, but I do think he's predominantly that downfield contested catch red zone monster. And that's what I kind of look for him to be, Ty. And I think he can do that on lower volume, but he has to have the right quarterback and offensive system. What's your take on DJ Chark? And do you think he can be kind of an alpha wide receiver? Do you see him as more of that kind of downfield contested catch guy, or is he just
I've always
pretty
thought
much
of
that
him,
one tricker?
And with how little the Jaguars invest in the wide receiver position, obviously we saw Marvin Jones heavily involved with Bevel there and stuff, but we thought that was kind of a vote of confidence in DJ Chark possibly getting a deal. Maybe they thought, in Jacksonville that he could be the guy going forward. But yeah, I mean, I think he's fairly one-dimensional, a field stretcher kind of. I don't see him as much more than that. And I just think, my rankings are very unfriendly to this passing game in Jacksonville, which is a far cry from trying to get a step ahead of Trevor Lawrence coming onto the scene. But yeah, they scored under 15 points per game on offense, the lowest scoring offense in all of football in Jacksonville, 6th fewest yards, 4th fewest plays. So they were a slow, inefficient, shitty scoring offense. And I think only the Giants turned the ball over more. They were just a bad football team. 3rd fewest yards after the catch as a team, 20% bad throw percentage on Pro Football Reference, the 3rd worst, 3rd lowest on target percentage. So Trevor Lawrence taking a massive step in season 2 is, the only thing that you can hope for if you're looking at some of these wide receivers in Jacksonville, because DJ Chark certainly didn't play himself into a nice contract on the open market here.
And he was banged up.
So I could see him back in Jacksonville easily because they want depth at the wide receiver position there, I would imagine, and I'm sure they have some plans for it. And he does things that LaVisca and Marvin Jones don't necessarily do. Marvin Jones will at least stop doing that soon.
Yeah, totally. I definitely think he's got a little bit more electricity than Marvin.
And Bevel's back as well. We could see what we saw this year, and that's Marvin Jones getting those deep shots drawn up for him in the first quarter that are, scripted plays. So that was scary too if you own DJ Chark.
Yeah, and that's a dagger in the heart of DJ Chark's production, 100%. Marvin Jones going back there, if Darrell Bevel is a part of that staff, those guys are boys from the Detroit days. And, like you said, Ty, Marvin Jones does do a lot of the stuff that DJ Chark does, especially in the red zone, which is where we're hoping to see DJ Chark get the most of his production, because we want DJ Chark to get double-digit touchdowns, but Marvin Jones kills that.
Who would you take between the two?
I think I take DJ Chark. I think he's only 23, 24 still.
Yeah, it's
definitely
almost 10 years.
Definitely an 8. But take the age apart. If they're both in Jacksonville, I might still go DJ Chark. I don't know. I just think
I think I have him back to back.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where I got MJJ. I don't think quite as close. But again, like I said, I'm a little bit higher than you on DJ Chark. I have him as my wide receiver 42. MJJ's in that early 50s area. So a little bit of a gap between those two. Next guy, you touched on him when we talked Juju, Ty. Let's get into it. Antonio walked off the field in the middle of the game. Brown. Is anybody giving this guy a shot?
I think so. I mean, the wide receiver 8 in points per game this season. Really hard to pin down his value. If you're asking me where I value him in Dynasty, he's definitely a hold at this stage in Dynasty. If you own him, I'm sure somebody will take a shot on him, though. I mean, the Bucs said 0 tolerance, yet he was back towards the end of the season after his suspension, his ridiculous suspension. So there's really no rules or anything when it comes to players as talented as Antonio Brown. I've always said that. I always will say that. So when he does land on a team, he likely becomes instantly fantasy viable, though, and he'll get a big bump in value. He'll shoot up dynasty rankings the second he does sign with somebody this offseason.
Yeah, AB will tell you that there's no rules for AB, too. AB will tell you that, too.
He doesn't play by anybody's rules, not even his own.
It probably doesn't even bleed his own blood. Yeah, no, I think he's going to land somewhere and he's probably going to produce for fantasy, but I'm not touching him with the 20-foot pole myself, just because, you might think you have a wide receiver too, but then you just have a dead roster spot. So we ain't want none of that. I'm going to fire off a couple names here, Ty, and then we're going to get into some of these other big names that we've wanted to talk about, the meat and potatoes of the show, so to speak, although we already pretty much have an entire show recorded, which is fantastic. We knew that coming in. We're good. So some of the other names we got Traquan Smith, Christian Kirk. You know what, Ty? Do you want to cut the piss off and make a little second episode of all that stuff there?
Yeah, we could talk about free agents like a little bit after the NFL playoffs. I think would be good time, but it definitely, I think the reason we tried to force it in here is because we wanted to talk about wide receiver needy teams, but you can't really do that at this stage of the game without talking about some of these free agents. Like we're talking about Buffalo and Arizona, two of the most potent passing games in all of football. They both have multiple free agent wide receivers. They also have young guys like Rondell Moore and Gabriel Davis. So we wanted to talk about some of those guys. And we failed to even talk about guys like Tyler Johnson and stuff when it comes to Chris Godwin possibly departing in Tampa
Jalen
Bay.
Darden.
So there's a lot more to dive into when it comes to free agency, and we'll definitely hit that after the playoffs.
Hundo peasy. Okay, Ty, so we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, and we're just going to do a bunch of check-ins on a bunch of these wide receivers. We like to do that. We like to dive into a player, talk about their situation, talk about what we saw, and talk about what we think we're going to see moving forward. And so these guys are, let's just say, big changes amongst the big producers. So these are guys who have previously been heartthrobs for fantasy of the past for us, or that we've wanted to break out. Some of them we've seen break out. Some of them we've seen opposite break out. So basically tank. Don't know what I was going for there, but
some of them I think we want to see, like, how real is it? Like, where does this now cement them going forward because of the season they had?
Yeah, and talk about cement. This guy has cemented himself into my heart for sure, and that would be Cooper Kupp. Huge seasons, probably one of the best fantasy seasons we've seen. Obviously, he has, from a wide receiver, obviously he had that extra game to do it in with the Rams, but man, Cooper Kupp, what a year. Things went really well for him. Obviously, Matthew Stafford was in the fold. Robert Woods got hurt. Odell didn't get there until week 10, I believe. So really, really hot start to the season. And it kind of came on the back of what we had said he needed coming into the season, Ty, a quarterback that's going to sling it, some more air yards, some good red zone work, and he got all of that, and we'll get into it in a second. But do you think with Robert Woods coming back and potentially an Odell return, or maybe continued progression from Van Jefferson, like you were mentioning before, do you think Cooper Kupp is like a glaring regression candidate, or do you think that with Matt Stafford in the fold, Sean McVay's innovative offense, do you think Cooper Kupp can kind of maintain this type of production?
No, I think you touched on a lot of that. Like, the Rams really did transform in 2021. We were buying the shit out of going from one end of the spectrum with Jared Goff to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which was the high-end range of outcomes that Matthew Stafford still had to offer. And he hit that pretty high-end range of outcomes for sure, which could constitute a regression candidate. But who's to say they can't continue this success going forward? Like, we know the scheme. It was also, after all, Stafford's first season in McVay's system in LA, and they ranked second in completed air yards, first on a per attempt basis, and you add in the after the catch machine with Kupp, with Woods back in the fold. It's hard to not think that they could continue this. At the very least, like, I think it's almost impossible to not consider Cooper Kupp an elite wide receiver at this point, even in Dynasty.
No, I love it. We were kind of calling for it this offseason, and it could have really gone both ways. It really, really could have, especially with Robert Woods staying healthy, and you never really know what's going to happen with a new quarterback coming in. But I talked about the increase in the air yards for Cooper Kupp, and it was a massive increase in air yards. I tweeted out earlier today that this year, Cooper Kupp had the 8th most air yards among all wide receivers, and that was a 69% increase from his previous career high. So almost 70% more air yards than previously. So 970 he had in 2019, and he had over 1,560 this year, which was absolutely bananas. But the interesting thing, and you were saying, like, there could be a chance where he continues his production. Well, if you look at it, he was the only guy in the top 15 of air yards for wide receivers to have an average depth of target with less than 9 yards. So he was getting his targets super shallow still, as Cooper Kupp does. But he was, and obviously a lot of that comes with getting 191 targets. You're going to get those accumulated air yards. But the share was just massive, and it really, really produced some elite fantasy play. So even if he could bump that average depth of target up just a little bit, like even Devontae Adams is the only other guy in the top 15 of air yards under 10. And he had just like a 9.5 average depth of target. So bump Cooper Kupp to 9.5, maybe 10 air yards per target. And I think we're talking about continued elite production. I have him at my dynasty wide receiver 9 right now. And I'd probably have him higher if he wasn't such an aged wide receiver. He came in at like 25. And so he's probably 28, 29 right now, where I've got some of those younger guys ahead of him. But what's your take on Cooper Kupp? You said he was an elite dynasty wide receiver. Just how elite are you saying, Ty?
Yeah, I think I have him as my wide receiver 6, like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, guys like that. And then Devontae Adams, like Chris Godwin, AJ Brown, guys like that. So I 100% think Cooper Kupp has just done nothing but continue to climb higher and higher throughout the season. You mentioned the target volume, and people will point to that. Well, we've seen 200 target seasons. We've seen 180 plus target seasons. What we haven't seen is a 1,900 yard receiving season from anybody other than Calvin Johnson and now Cooper Kupp. Like everybody, it's the most fantasy points ever scored by a wide receiver in the history of football. So it's everybody is chasing Cooper Kupp now in this 17 game era. It's actually the best PPR points per game season by a wide receiver since Jerry Rice in 1995, even on a points per game basis. So, you know, it's just pretty remarkable what he did. Like the consistency of top 12 weeks, it's making me lose my words. Like it leaves me speechless. Like I use quick shout out the FF Spaceman. He puts together just a phenomenal database, several of them actually, and it's one of the only Patreons that I subscribe to. But check this out: only 3 wide receivers in the NFL posted more than 6 top 12 finishes this year. Nobody hit double digits except Cooper Kupp, who was a top 12 wide receiver 15 times this season. So,
Jesus.
You know, regression, smagression. This will definitely be Cooper Kupp's career year, yes, but it's going to get baked into his price a little bit, I think. And Kupp is just, he's good at scoring fucking touchdowns. Like, he's just really good. He led the NFL in red zone targets and receptions, but 7 players actually had more end zone targets than Cooper Kupp. And we talked a lot during the offseason for the Rams, like they should look to pass the ball a lot more in close in the post-Goff era in LA. And we know that could continue to be the case. And we know what Cooper Kupp offers after the catch. He was the best in show this season. He's top 5 in yards after the catch amongst wide receivers in back-to-back years now. And yeah, I just think we talked about this transformation that the Rams have kind of undergone while keeping some of the essence of the Sean McVay system in place. And it's all just a fantastically well-oiled machine, and we want pieces from it. And Cooper Kupp has that chemistry and rapport on paper now with Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, it's just wheels up, right? It's just wheels up. You can't say that, like, he's going to be going in first rounds of fantasy drafts next year, and that's totally fine because I think he's probably going to pay off that price that people are paying.
And you can pair Cooper Kupp with a stud youngster like a Jalen Waddle, for instance, in the following round, or you can select somebody like Elijah Moore or Amon-Ra St. Brown to inject a little bit more youth into your dynasty startup roster. So I think roster construction is, you know, at the forefront of a lot of these conversations, and that's why I'm so comfortable having Cooper Kupp ranked so high, because you could really hammer the wide receiver position in a startup and accumulate a lot of these young, awesome talents.
Yeah, you always want to be churning young wide receivers through your dynasty rosters at every level of your depth chart. So bottom of the depth chart, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, bring in those young guys on your dynasty teams because those are the guys who are going to break out big. Okay, Ted, speaking of breakout big, Deebo freaking Samuel this season with the San Francisco 49ers. What a year he had. It was that was a huge miss for me. I've never been a huge Deebo guy. I will say that. But he proved me wrong. I'm personally still in the camp where I don't think he's elite long term. I think Trey Lance is going to change a lot of things, which is kind of what we were saying coming into the season, Ty. And I haven't necessarily moved a ton off of that stance, but where are you sitting on Deebo? Like, has he changed your mind on the Brandon Ayuk conversation? Because I know you are a big Brandon Ayuk fan.
Yeah, he's definitely made Brandon Ayuk fall in my rankings, not unlike Robert Woods, right? Like the same thing with Robert Woods. These guys have fallen down my board because of these ascensions that we've seen. I think I still have Debo just outside my top 12 wide receivers. I think he's in a tier with guys like Jalen Waddle that we mentioned, but other guys that have a little more ambiguity attached to them that you might pass on to take a Debo Samuel because he's so electric and exciting to watch and still younger than a guy like Nuke Hopkins or Amari Cooper. Maybe. I mean, Amari's still like 21, isn't he? That guy just doesn't age.
Yeah, no.
Like. But yeah, I mean, what can you say about the season Debo Samuel had? And we just mentioned Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp's the only guy who has more yards after the catch than Debo Samuel since Debo Samuel entered the league. And Debo Samuel's missed a dozen games.
Yeah, he's been
during that span.
That was really
incredible.
impressive. That was really impressive.
Averages 10 yards after the catch per reception in his career. And so like every time he catches the ball, he's averaging what a first down is in football every time. So it seems like a cheat code for football teams to let him touch the ball. And we saw it last year. The problem was he missed time, and the other problem last year was that Debo had an average depth of target under 2.5. It was ridiculous. And that shot up to like 8 something this year. So, and only stands to improve if and when Trey Lance possibly takes the reins in San Francisco. And that increase in average depth of target, that's what led to like a 1,400-yard season for Debo. And I just think the explosive plays are just out of control, almost built in. He's just a big play waiting to happen every time he touches the ball. And in 2021, just with his catches, nobody had more 40-yard receptions than Debo. And he's just he really is a cheat code. Like he's over 2 yards per route run in all 3 of his seasons in the league now, improving every season as well. And in 2021, he actually became the first player in NFL history to have over 300 yards rushing and over 1,100 yards receiving.
That's
so this
dope.
guy is a very special talent, and sometimes we can see a lot of apprehension when it comes to these unique talents. And so I think we should try and buy it in this more positionless football and more creative usage, especially when he has a creative coach like Kyle Shanahan who can scheme wide receivers so well.
Yeah, well, he definitely won me over this year. Like, I'm still a Brandon Ayuk fan, much like yourself, Ty, but the big plays that you alluded to are the thing that kind of won me over. I thought he was going to be that guy, like, who wasn't going to be able to stay in the after the catch that he's got there, but he's a Konami wide receiver if there ever was one, in that positionless football like you're talking about is kind of what we need to lean into, like you said. So I am definitely coming more into that, where I have previously been a little bit hesitant, right? Like, I don't know this guy's role, so why do I want to invest in something that's so unknown? Well, we know it now, and Debo is it.
Yards after the catch isn't necessarily what you want to rely on. It's not as sticky as air yards and stuff, and frankly, it is almost reflective of a lower ceiling player sometimes.
Yeah.
If somebody is so reliant on yards after the catch as opposed to just getting the yards before the catch is much easier when you just have to catch the ball instead of make 4 guys miss on your way to getting the same yardage. So it's just that there are outliers in every rule, and Cooper Kupp and Debo Samuel have been the outliers over the last few years in the NFL when it comes to yards after the catch. Maybe Devontae Adams deserves to be in that conversation as well.
Totally. And Ty, I know that chicks dig the long ball, but in my opinion, yards after the catch are way doper. Like, I would rather see a guy break a bunch of tackles for 60 than a deep bomb with a guy catching an easy one for 60.
And what we're seeing with Cooper Kupp, with Debo Samuel, with these average depths of target that are over 8 and not like, very low like a Jalen Waddle or like Debo last year, that when you do offer them a little bit of air yards and you offer them some big playability, they deliver. And that's how they can have this crazy ceiling when you think of them as lower ceiling plays. So it's a treat, and you target the offenses and the schemes. So
and the sweet thing is that those 8 average depth of target yards aren't necessarily that high a bar to get that ceiling. You know what I mean? So it's not a huge increase that these types of guys need
teams, really quick,
to get that.
The Rams and the 49ers, they have McVay and Shanahan respectively. But play action is a big piece of this puzzle. I think Cooper Kupp obviously a little more end zone targets and all that kind of stuff, and red zone targets, and Debo just a little more explosive this year.
Mm-hmm.
Konami code rushing.
Totally. So a counterpart, so to speak, of the San Francisco 49ers in one of those conference championship games is the Cincinnati Bengals. And I don't know if that's necessarily a counterpart, because I guess you might call the Rams their counterpart, but that's the
Super Bowl match.
There we go. Yeah. That would be wild. The Niners and the Bengals. I actually heard on the broadcast, I heard on the broadcast actually that it had been like X amount of years to the day since that Cincinnati Bengals and Niners Super Bowl that happened way back, and they said something like it's still like the highest rated Super Bowl or something like that, and I think that's got to be like a percentage per capita or something like that. But that would be an interesting Super Bowl matchup to see so long after the fact. I think a couple of the names that would be front and center in that matchup would be Jamar Chase and obviously his buddy T. Higgins. We're going to start with Jamar Chase, but I think it kind of makes sense to intertwine these guys with each other a little bit in such a bright future in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. And we saw Joe Burrow hit some of that ceiling towards the end of the year this season, and that's what's got us salivating for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. So talk about them, Ty. First, why don't you start with where you've got them in your rankings and how far apart you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in your rankings?
Number one, baby. I got Jamar Chase, number one overall. I think he's my number one overall player in a startup draft with some of the ambiguity at the running back position right now. And T. Higgins, I believe, is like a top 15, top 24 wide receiver. Like, I think he's my wide receiver 16 or 17 at this stage in Dynasty. So really like both of them. Maybe with Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. I don't even think I have Chase that high. So, you know, maybe a team that I have the highest two wide receivers ranked inside the top 20 or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, I'm buying the situation. Jamar Chase, definitely by far and away. We talk about a lot of these things. So we talk about deep ball receptions, air yards, or whatever. We talk about yards after the catch. We talk about end zone targets. These are the high leverage work you can get or whatever, or the different ways you can go about accumulating your fantasy points or whatever. Jamar Chase was top 5 in deep ball receptions. He was also top 5 in yards after the catch. Top 5 in the NFL in end zone targets. So it's really amazing. And you know, we've talked a lot about Jamar Chase this year. We made this declaration mid-season about Jamar Chase being our number one overall player in Dynasty, I believe. And we talked lots about everything going right for Cincinnati this season. Talked about how much run heavier the Bengals have been this season. We talked about the crazy efficiency this season for Jamar Chase. But, you know, there could be an increase in volume next year if the Bengals aren't as dominant or whatever. And I just think there is a lot of room to grow for Jamar Chase. And, you know, we almost always buy a sophomore season. And, you know, all we want is NFL level production put on paper to continue the career comps that Jamar Chase has put himself in the company of coming out of college. And now with this first year, this, you know, borderline historic first season in the NFL, sky's the limit for Jamar Chase attached to his college quarterback, Joe Burrow, and a pass heavy scheme that, you know, happened to be a little more run heavy than we anticipated this year.
Totally, but still produced this season from him. You mentioned the volume could go up. Only 141 targets, Ty. That's not an astronomical amount when we look at Cooper Kupp got 191 this year in a 17-game season. 95 receptions, 1,680 yards, 13 touchdowns for Jamar Chase. And you said all that deep work. The guy got 768 yards after the catch as well. So massive rookie season, and it's only up for him. And even like contested catch situations, I think he probably could be a little bit more efficient. 33 contested targets and only 12 contested catches. Obviously, you don't necessarily want a guy to be, you know, having a plethora of contested targets because that means he's not necessarily separating. But, you know, Jamar Chase is that dude. 21 missed tackles forced out of a wide receiver is awesome.
And that's how that's how you can be top 5 in yards after the catch.
Yeah.
And you're also top 5 in deep targets and stuff.
Exactly.
He's doing it when he does get those short targets, those slants. You know, he's doing a lot with them.
I like it.
And of course, T. Higgins is gonna see a lot of end zone targets and a lot of contested catches himself. And Joe Burrow is down to throw it up to whichever one of those guys is not getting blanketed by a safety over the top.
Yeah, I liked seeing that. I liked seeing that Joe Burrow didn't always prioritize Jamar Chase over T. Higgins. I like that they can both operate within that ecosystem, and Joe Burrow's not necessarily just going to play favorites with his college teammate, because T. Higgins is that dude too. The guy had 121 targets of his own this year, 82 receptions, 1,197 yards, just under 1,200, and 6 touchdowns. And that right there is a fat spot for positive regression. T. Higgins scoring 6 touchdowns. He scored 6 in the first 2 seasons of his career, actually. And I think, like, I would probably bet the over on 6 touchdowns for T. Higgins next year, to be completely honest with you. In a full season with that chemistry, I think T. Higgins is a candidate to put up double-digit touchdowns every single season. Not going to be that yards after the catch guy like Jamar Chase. That's the beauty of these guys, too, is they're very defined in their profiles and their roles. I think Jamar Chase, very all-around, can do a lot of the things T. Higgins can do. I don't think T can do all the things that Jamar Chase can necessarily do, but I think they complement each other really nicely, and we even saw some versatility from T. Higgins this year where he's going over the middle, catching some of those intermediate routes and not necessarily all end zone and deep target work. So I think wheels up for him too, man. I've got him at wide receiver 14 in Dynasty myself.
And my point about the run game, like if Mixon and Pierre or whoever, Mixon and blank, Chris Evans, I don't know, but if their run game is still doing what they did this year, next year, that's a good thing. That just means that their run game is setting up their passing game, which is the entire point of this offense, is to have the passing game humming. And if it takes the run game to set that up and have teams not play high safety looks against them every time, despite the weaponry that they put forward at the wide receiver position, then that's just going to lend to those efficient seasons. All I'm saying is that if it isn't as efficient next year, then maybe the volume will be able to compensate for that. So I think both these guys have high ceilings, and I just think the Bengals are built to play in any game script, and they're also always looking to get Jamar Chase and T. Higgins involved. Improved
defense for them, and Zach Taylor did a much better job this year than I thought. Because he was not in my good books after last year. I'll tell you that much.
I definitely did not like Zach Taylor coming this year.
So. Completely opposite of the dynamism provided by Jamar Chase and T. Higgins is Hunter Renfrow in Las Vegas, Ty. Unreal year for the slot substitute teacher, though. I will give him that. He brought his half zip every day, gave her 110, and lo and behold, he had a really, really good season. Now, the coaching change could have a little bit of impact for him, but he really continued to produce even after Chucky was out of the building. I think a potential quarterback change might be kind of a bigger dent in his armor, so to speak, but I think his defined production profile, defined role can operate in most offenses with most quarterbacks. So I think he would probably be a safer guy as opposed to if it's like a deep target guy who is getting this change around him. But what's your take on Hunter Renfrow, man? Do you think, like, is he a top 24 wide receiver for you going forward, or is there too much uncertainty? Do you think that was just kind of like a flash in the pan season?
I don't know. Like, you have to give it up. Like, he might have been one of the best picks in all of fantasy this season. Yeah, what did you call him? The sub teacher? I love that.
The slot substitute teacher.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of like a math teacher. I think
he looks like one. Yeah.
Said that before, but
no, I made it up. No, that was me.
As the wide receiver 10 this year overall in PPR leagues, like that is insane. And the FFPC. Like in best ball leagues from August until the beginning of the season, like peak draft season there. He was being drafted as the wide receiver 99. He was going as the Gretzky pick around pick 300
Happy birthday to Gretz. It's his birthday today.
Is it really?
For real. Yeah, it's Gretz's birthday, January 26th. What up? Well, big fan of the show.
I bet he could still play and just like play on the half boards on the power play and still get a couple apples.
Guaranteed.
But yeah, he was the only wide receiver to finish top 20 at the position this year, despite having an ADP outside the top 50 wide receivers. And yeah, he was wide receiver 99. There's definitely an argument to make, though, for not just a volume-driven season, but how unbelievably volume-driven the season was and how unbelievably driven by circumstance that all was, because I think Henry Ruggs' last game with the Raiders, or anybody else ever again, for that matter, probably was in week 7. And the Raiders' bye was week 8. So Hunter Renfrow was the wide receiver 7 overall from that point on. Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams were the only wide receivers who had more catches than Hunter Renfrow during that span. So I'm sort of selling the 2021 Renfrow season, just the volume-driven nature of the other weapons. Like Darren Waller missed time as well, and he's the Raiders' inarguable top target in the passing game. And yeah, they lost Henry Ruggs, and up until that point, I think both Henry Ruggs and Hunter Renfrow were averaging more than 12 points per game in PPR, but under 13. So they were pretty close to each other. And even at the end of the year there, like Renfrow was no league winner. Weeks 15 to 17, he was a wide receiver 21 overall, under 15 points per game. Under 15 PPR points in all 3 games during the fantasy playoffs. Meanwhile, Zay Jones was the wide receiver 16 overall. Outscored him big time during the playoffs. So teams figured out that Renfrow was like the man in the passing game eventually, and the Raiders and Derek Carr had no problem kind of moving more towards other guys. And then you think about next year, like maybe Zay Jones and Hunter Renfrow kind of cannibalize each other in 2022, both being behind Darren Waller. And we know the running backs are more involved in the passing game as well. Maybe even Bryan Edwards truthers have some of their dreams come true somehow.
Yeah.
But maybe the Raiders, should be a team that stand out as one of the more likely squads to be in that wide receiver market as well, right? Both in free agency and the draft, I would say. And this is all under the guise, like you alluded to, of a new regime, a new head coach, a new GM, all of whom have zero ties to these players, including Hunter Renfrow. And for that matter, like you kind of hinted, maybe Derek Carr gets dealt and they go full rebuild mode in Las Vegas. And we know Derek Carr's skill set really aligns with Hunter Renfrow, especially once, Henry Ruggs and that vertical element in the offense kind of just went away. So as far as value that I place on Hunter Renfrow in Dynasty, it ain't much. Like, I definitely a sell candidate, in my opinion, if you could fetch wide receiver 2 prices.
Oh, yeah. I think you could, too.
Really? Yeah. See, I
depending on the league mate.
But he's definitely a sell then. Maybe you could sell him come redraft season, like if they don't do much there. Maybe. But I'd straight up take guys like Tyler Johnson, Nico Collins. Like, I do not really want...
Nico Collins is a bit strong. I definitely would do some Tyler Johnson.
Yeah, maybe I'm being a little silly, a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think it just comes down to like my skepticism when it comes to the ceiling that Hunter Renfrow offers, in my opinion. Like if I have a Hollywood Brown or a Devontae Smith on my squad, maybe that's where I'd add a Hunter Renfrow in certain instances where roster construction like really sways me, but it feels like this could end up as Renfro's career year by a wide margin, and again, driven by volume, which was mostly driven by circumstance.
Well, yeah, and I think like he's not going to be a guy who's scoring 9 touchdowns every season. He scored 9 this year after 2 last year and only 4 the previous year. And I think some of that came with Derek Carr's trust in him. All 9 of those touchdowns were in the red zone. He was the 4th highest scoring wide receiver in the red zone all season long. That's great for him, but that just screams that's not happening again. So I'm with you. I'm selling him, and I would probably be putting some feelers out there right now because he's hot off that top 10 season, and I think he only stands to lose a little bit of luster as opposed to really gaining it depending on what happens this offseason. So I would be slanging the shit out of some Hunter Renfrow right now. The slot substitute teacher can go teach another class, motherfucker. Okay, next guy, Michael Pitman Jr. And look at him with a wide receiver 22 PPR finish. That is definitely, higher than I was expecting coming into 2021. I wouldn't say that we thought that would be out of his realm of possibilities because wide receiver
is the wide receiver 50 in FFPC best ball leagues.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like
it's a big hit.
It was a big hit for sure. And I liked it. Carson Wentz came in there and definitely kept him relevant. T.Y. Hilton got hurt. He looked decent in that offense coming back as well. I think it was a little bit of a spotty wide receiver 22 PPR finish for Michael Pittman, but I think probably most of those are. What's your take on him? Do you like him?
I like the talent. Like, don't get me wrong. I am definitely lower on Michael Pittman than ECR in Dynasty rankings. There's no question. Like, I have him as a wide receiver 3 in my Dynasty ranks.
Same.
And probably will in my 2022 best ball ranks that I'll be whipping up pretty soon. He's ranked alongside youngsters that I also really like. Devontae Smith, Rondell Moore, even like guys like that I'd probably look at pretty close to him. I definitely have him ahead of someone like Kadarius Toney, Darnell Mooney maybe. I think I have below Michael Pittman. Mike Williams, guys like that would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Like I might have to wait and see where that, like they could flip-flop in my rankings. But I'm saying he's a wide receiver 2 in most people's Dynasty ranks that I've seen, and an almost unanimous top 50 pick overall in startups.
Yep.
And I'm just kind of handling him with a lot more caution, I guess, and it has almost nothing to do with the talent. It's almost entirely because of the situation, you know what I mean? Like, Colts will be a run-first team so long as Jonathan Taylor's there, so long as those cogs on the offensive line are healthy, and it's already just an unfriendly situation for wide receivers. I think the Colts are one of just 9 teams this season to score under 30 points per game in PPR from the wide receiver position as a whole. And now you add in that the quarterback situation is just totally uncertain in Indianapolis, and the Colts could probably constitute as a wide receiver needy team as well. And after they kind of failed to address the position last offseason, they got very little out of T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell. Maybe they'll be more inclined to do so this offseason as they kind of remain one of the most competitive teams in football that also have cap space that they can spend. So I like Michael Pittman. He can do a lot of things really well. The talent's almost undeniable, but there's so many attractive names at the wide receiver position that I kind of just want over him still, because they don't have as many obstacles to overcome as I see it to deliver that top 12 season, which I'm looking for. If I'm drafting a wide receiver 2, I want a ceiling to be wide receiver 1 season, you know what I mean? And the ceiling, I guess, is what I have concerns about. Like, even this year, you kind of alluded to it, there just wasn't many big weeks, right? Like a top 12 wide receiver in just 3 games this season. Pittman hit 21 PPR points just one single time. And the reason I worry about the team is that, like Michael Pitman needs volume. That's the problem here. In 11 games where Pittman caught 5 balls or more, he averaged over 17.5 points per game PPR. Really nice. In games he caught fewer than 5 passes, he barely averaged 5 fantasy points. So
yeah,
I just don't see the spike touchdown season being able to compensate or even stack on top of volume, you know what I mean? Yeah. That I'm already worried about, which is what I think he would need to compensate to give you that like special season. So, and if you look at PFF, like Michael Pitman led the team by a wide margin in red zone targets, but barely top 20 overall. And when you look at end zone targets, he saw 7, which led the Colts, but barely. Like the margin is far less pronounced, and like 50 guys in the NFL had more. And his market share was like 20% of the team's end zone targets. It's just not impressive. And this is because Jonathan Taylor had 92 red zone touches, almost 30 more than any other player in
ridiculous.
Football. And if 30 is the number, and if we're looking more towards the end zone, JT had 30 carries inside the 5-yard line for the Colts this year, a dozen more than any other player. So Pittman he's in a very run-heavy scheme that has one of the best offensive lines, one of the best running backs, and that's all the more true the closer to their opponent's end zone that they get.
Right.
And you add on the Colts could just have a new quarterback in 2022, making Pittman have to build chemistry with yet another quarterback heading into a season. And I just think they're also, like, Indy's really positioned to add a wide receiver of consequence, if not multiple guys. And that's just too many concerns, too many potential lumps to the head, like AKA down weeks, from somebody who will cost weekly fantasy lineup starter prices.
Totally. And I think, like, to me, he's kind of a bit of a catch and fall down type receiver. Like, he's not like on Alshon levels of that just yet. But he's kind of a bit of that. 6'4", 220, hasn't gotten a lot of yards after the catch so far in his 2-year career. And yeah, it's just like you mentioned, like, if you're drafting a wide receiver 2, you want a guy who has wide receiver 1 ceiling. Further to that, if I'm drafting a guy who looks like the clear-cut top wide receiver on his offense, I also want that type of ceiling out of that guy, or I'm probably not even going to be diving into that offense. So, Michael Pitman is definitely doesn't look like he's on our radar this season, Ty, or for Dino, in fact.
Yeah, it's tough.
So we're going to talk a little CD Lamb here, Ty, and we're running pretty long here. We'll make a call pretty soon here as far as how deep we're going into these guys. But CD Lamb, the wide receiver 15 in PPR this season. Obviously, we talked about that Dallas situation and how he has everything in place to continue to be an elite fantasy weapon moving forward. Really quick, Ty, I caught a little bit of flack on Twitter for having CD Lamb over Justin Jefferson in my dynasty rankings, and I don't think that's as spicy of a take as Twitter would have let me believe. But where do you sit on the CD Lamb versus Justin Jefferson situation?
Yeah, I think I'd take CeeDee Lamb over Justin Jefferson, but
Nice.
I think Justin Jefferson is going to be number 1 in some people's dynasty rankings.
Good point.
I just still have small concerns with Justin Jefferson, just in terms of Kirk Cousins and his future with Minnesota. New regime coming in, new GM, new coach in Minnesota. We have to remember. Adam Thielen, people like to think that he's on his way out. I'm just not so sure that is the case. We know he doesn't have as much tread on his tires as some guys. So. And Irv Smith's coming back, and that's a run-first scheme that I don't think they're going to go away from, because Kirk Cousins has so much success in that outside zone scheme.
Yeah.
The play action, the flood concepts, and everything. So I think, Justin Jefferson, you have to bank on this elite, borderline historic efficiency, and that's just hard to do. And whereas CeeDee Lamb, it feels like that big breakout season is still yet to come.
And he can provide that efficiency, and we know he's going to get that buttload of consistent top tier volume as well, especially with maybe Michael Gallup, maybe Amari Cooper leaving the door. I think one of those two guys stays, but I think that's going to be a big boost for CD to get a little bit more volume. And we know what he can do after the catch. We know what he can do in the end zone. Just keep that volume going up. And I think CD, I actually have him as my dynasty wide receiver 2. That's how heavy I believe in CD Lamb. All right, Ty. So we got a group of guys who might be losing luster. Do we want to run through them? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we could save them if you want. We could talk about them. There's definitely some interesting names here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just do some quick touches on these guys here. So DeAndre Hopkins had a rough year with the Arizona Cardinals. Only played 10 games this season. A very up and down 10 games for Nuke Hopkins. Just to lay it out here, Ty. 4 top 15 performances this season in those 10 games, and then the rest of those six other games, were outside of the top 20. He still scored 8 touchdowns, which is kind of promising in only 12 games. But what are you saying for Nuke? Do you think he's losing some of his dynasty luster, or what?
Well, I mean, I get the worries. Like, the age makes him a ticking time bomb in dynasty. Like, his ADP won't bake his age in, I don't think, that much, just because the situation is sexy on the surface, and Nuke is a household name. But yeah, like you mentioned, I wanted to throw some of those stats out too. Like, only 3 top 12 performances in 10 games this year, so 30% of the time, compared to almost 50% of the time over the previous 4 seasons. And the floor was super worrisome and also tied to touchdowns. So I think that was really concerning, because he had just 4 top 24 performances in 2022 or 2021, 40% of the time. Over the previous 4 seasons, Nuke was the top 24 wide receiver almost 75% of the time. So, and it all comes down to volume with Nuke. Like, this guy was the majority of instances over the last half decade of a wide receiver seeing 30% of his team's targets. That was down to 20% this year. So definitely worried about that, because it really is all about the volume. So yeah. You know, I think the question is definitely polarizing too. Like, do you buy this dip on Nuke, or do you get out while you can on Nuke? I don't think there's much in between there, to be honest, because he is going to be the dreaded 30 years old heading into next season.
Absolutely. And like, he might end up just being one of those guys that you hold and just dies on your roster, unfortunately. But I think there's still definitely some production to be had out of Nuke. Just to further your point about the target share, Ty, he had more than 20% of the team's targets in every game last season, but he hit that in only half of his 10 games played this year. It's only 5 of 10 games. And I think it's going to be interesting, because you said the sexy situation, all those free agents there. The Cardinals have very little cap space, just over $7 million in cap space. But I think some of that
AJ Green, Christian Kirk, you got both running backs
and Zach Ertz,
and how run heavy they were factored into the wide receiver. I mean, just to point out, they were still a top 10 scoring team in terms of wide receiver PPR points. It was just spread around 4 guys this year, a little bit more.
And we saw that with Christian Kirk getting a little bit of a surge in production as well. I think it's going to be a very interesting offseason, but I think I would prefer to go out and buy Nuke as opposed to selling him for what you're going to get for him right now.
And I'll err on the side of caution that maybe this year was the outlier. Like, Nuke was still top 5 in fantasy points per touch among all players in the NFL this season. So Nuke was still Nuke when he did get the ball, and maybe they'll get him the ball more, especially because they had such a lull on the offense post Nuke Hopkins injury there.
And like I said, man, in this offense, he scored 8 touchdowns seemingly in his sleep this year. So
we had a pretty good answer there. What about Calvin Ridley, Trav?
What the fuck do you do with Calvin Ridley, Ty?
Shot backs out. It's
Jesus. It's I don't know if a shot back's gonna handle it, folks. I don't know. It's really hard. I have him, if I'm looking at my ranks here, I still do have him inside my top 36. I think I got him at wide receiver 29, and he's a candidate to jet up those rankings if I know that he's coming back for 2022. He's a candidate to fall down those rankings if I don't know what he's going to happen, or what's going to happen with him. I think he's back playing in 2022, but I kind of think it's going to be not with the Falcons, just because he's coming up on needing a new contract, and they're a team that's very, very close, on the fence of rebuilding this team. Matt Ryan's not long for the quarterback position there. Obviously, Kyle Pitts being the young guy, I think this would be the time for them to kind of blow it up, put some young pieces around a generational tight end. And in that situation, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be paying Calvin Ridley what he's going to want. And in saying that, what's he going to want? And then how does this half a season that he just took off play into his leverage for getting what he wants there? So I'm holding the shit out of him. I'm not selling, because I think I could be taking a huge lump on what I might get for him. And And I probably wouldn't be going out and buying either because somebody's going to want you to pay up for him.
Exactly. And that's what I think. Like, so completely bury the lead. Like, ignore the elephant in the room or not in the room in Calvin Ridley's case. Like, just analyze the situation. We warned the Falcons could look totally different under Arthur Smith. And the volume in particular that propped up this passing game, for fantasy, it could go away. We're saying. And it did it ever, right? And leaving Matt Ryan's future up for debate, as you alluded to. So the situation kind of sucks. And the quarterback play is deteriorating, diminishing, dying, whatever you want to call it. Cal Pitts probably ends up being ahead of Calvin Ridley, possibly, at some point in the pecking order.
Yeah.
Inside this pacified passing
Maybe.
game. And then you have Cordell Patterson and Mike Davis. I think both are free agents, and both guys, like, they could, be substituted by a more conventional 1-2 punch. I think making
replacement level players. Yeah.
Heavy. The offensive line can't possibly be worse. So the only question I have is how much of that is going to get baked into his price. On top of the uncertainty and wide range of outcomes that Calvin Ridley as a human being has as a football player, right? So I don't even know if he's going to play in 2022 right around, let alone as a Falcon. Maybe the Falcons deal him or something. Who knows? Yeah. I hope he kind of does end up elsewhere, to be honest. I think that would be the first step in propping him back up. But I worry that no matter what happens, folks are going to just go right back into bed with Calvin Ridley. Like, lest we forget how high his ADP was this past offseason. So I like Ridley as a wide receiver 3 in Dynasty, like you alluded to, but it's trippy to think that he's around some other heat bags like Michael Thomas, Robert Woods. Like, maybe you do inherit some risk on your best ball or Dynasty roster at that point in the draft when you're looking at these Michael Thomas, Robert Woods types.
Yeah, he definitely brought some new meaning to his nickname, the Riddler, this year because he is definitely a riddle that we're looking to solve.
Just to throw in there, like, and this is true with a lot of guys, like, I think the trajectory of your team really factors in heavily. Like, if you want to compete right away, try and build an instant competitor, are you more of a productive struggle kind of guy? Like, those are the questions you're asking yourself because that could dictate whether you go Calvin Ridley or maybe a veteran like Brandon Cooks or Adam Thielen, in a draft. So definitely you have to ask those questions. Yeah.
Okay, Ty, so this guy, we're talking about some guys that lost their luster. I don't know if we need to spend too much time on this guy right now. There is a ton to unpack, so we could go down a fat rabbit hole on Allen Robinson, Ty. Has he lost his luster for you as a fantasy asset?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I mean, there's dream scenarios where he could land in a good spot or anything. I don't really know what that means. I don't know if he's back in Chicago either. I don't
think so either. He's a free agent.
I just don't really know what to do with Allen Robinson because he certainly hasn't played where he's going to have teams lining up down the block to acquire services for what he's going to be asking for. And yeah, I just think what we saw was super concerning with Darnell Mooney just completely passing him. And that's what my dynasty rankings reflect that, obviously. So yeah, I mean, he scored as a top 24 wide receiver in 17 games over the previous 2 seasons heading into 2021. This year, A-Rob didn't deliver a single top 24 wide receiver performance.
Garbage.
Which is just crazy. Career worst 1.13 yards per route run, according to PFF, under 2.5 yards after the catch per reception. Converted just 1/3 of his contested catches and more than 3 times fewer catches for a first down in 2021 compared to 2020. So he's just, everything went away for Allen Robinson in 2021, had zero chemistry to build with Justin Fields, and the offensive line in Chicago just offered zero protection for them to be able to throw those good contested catches or whatever you want to call them. I just don't think Allen Robinson has a lot going for him. He really needs a quarterback who can deliver pinpoint accuracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's going to be hard to find that and hard to invest in that for our dynasty teams. Just a little perspective on that. Allen Robinson only scored 1 touchdown all season this year, and that's on 66 targets. Also on those 66 targets, he didn't even clear 450 receiving yards. And guys like Cedric Wilson and Quez Watkins both had only 61 targets, so 5 less, but they both cleared 600 receiving yards on the season, where Allen Robinson didn't even get to 450. So not good, Bob. Not good. I mean, the guy's still only 28, so maybe he bounces back and gives us a top 36 season.
He can't fall much further.
Exactly. So is he a throw-in on a trade at this point? Because I will take Allen Robinson as a throw-in on a trade right now, but I'm not going to go and acquire him as a centerpiece of a deal by any means. So if you're putting feelers out there and you think you have a little bit more value on your side of a trade, see if you can toss Allen Robinson on from the other guy's perspective and get that deal done and get yourself a guy who, he has a top 12 capable profile as an athlete and as a player. You know what I mean? He just needs that situation to come together around him, and it could happen.
Yeah, he's one of the worst wide receiver picks in all of fantasy this year. Well, in the past 6 years, he's twice been one of the best, if not the single best wide receiver pick in fantasy drafts. And yeah, he can't really be anything but a buy. He's cheap, and his value can really only increase this offseason as the bad taste in people's mouths kind of dissipates. He'll get the free agent bump. Maybe Sean Payton ends up in Chicago.
Oh God.
But if you own Allen Robinson, my point is your feet are glued to the pedals of the
yeah, totally. He's another one who might just have to die on the old dynasty roster. Last guy we're going to talk about who's just getting started hitting his stride in the NFL is Terry McLaurin. Ty finished as the wide receiver 25 this year in PPR. Great season. Unfortunately, the wide receiver 32 in points per game. And it was interesting because I was looking into that, and for how great he has been in his first 3 seasons, his best points per game finish in his 3 seasons is 20th, and that was last year. 32nd this year, 30th in his rookie year. So for me, that makes me kind of pump the brakes a little bit on him as a top 12 dynasty wide receiver. I think on talent alone, he can sneak inside that top 12, but I think there could be some value had in acquiring him, saying all that. But I think it's just hard to see that otherworldly top 5 season from Terry McLaurin for me. Do you see that potentially happening?
Yeah, it's frustrating because I see it in the range of outcomes when it comes to his talent. I really love Terry McLaurin a lot more than other guys we've talked about in this episode as well. And I know we keep coming back to it, if they could only have, improved quarterback play, and that really couldn't be true for anyone more than Terry McLaurin, really. Yeah. And I think he's definitely a victim of circumstance, but how much better do we see that getting? What happens to Logan Thomas next year? What is Curtis Samuel's deal? Can Antonio Gibson get more work in the receiving game? Is J.D. McKissick still going to be kicking around fucking up the program? So I think there's a lot of stuff to sift through in that passing game for Washington. We don't even know the fucking name of that team yet. So, get a name, and then I'll give you some value on Terry McLaurin. But I think it remains to be seen who their quarterback's going to be. Of course, is it Taylor Heineke? Is it Fitzmagic going to try and... I really don't know what's going to happen there. How involved in that quarterback class will they be this year? Washington has a lot of questions, but beyond improving their defense, quarterback's definitely at the top of that list.
Yeah, and they kind of played themselves out of a high pick for a quarterback too.
Terry McLaurin's no worse than a high-end wide receiver 2 in my dynasty ranks.
Oh, absolutely. I'm actually, all of that stuff said, I actually have him just snuck into my top 12 behind Chris Godwin at wide receiver 11. Based mostly on talent alone and the fact that, he's still giving us strong wide receiver 2 production in a dumpy situation that can't really get much worse. So I like it for Terry McLaurin going forward. I just, I'm a little bit weary of the situation for 2022 specifically.
And thinking about it, if I'm picking right now, I was just thinking about if I'm on the clock, because I have Terry McLaurin ranked as my wide receiver 13, and I'm thinking... I don't know if I don't want to move him down a little bit. I have Jalen Waddle ranked behind him. I think I'd take Jalen Waddle over him in a startup right now, yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think I would do that yet.
And I think Terry McLaurin just definitely belongs in that tier that's beyond the guys you were mentioning, like Chris Godwin, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, guys like that. Yeah.
And that's why it's good to use tiers too, Ty, is because especially in a draft situation, everybody says use tiers in a draft situation, but I think doing that doesn't set yourself up for failure, right? Because if you are seeing the draft come around to you and you see Terry McLaurin there and you're fired up to get him, you think you're going to get him 2 picks before he's going to go. If you have a tier where you're okay with taking a bunch of those guys in that spot who you think are going to give you similar production, you're not going to be so butthurt about Terry McLaurin getting drafted ahead of you, because you might be able to get a DJ Moore, you might be able to get a Jalen Waddle, a T Higgins in that range, and they can give you equal production to what you're probably going to get out of Terry McLaurin. So no, I like that. I think that was really, really well put there with the situation and whatnot. Whew. That's all she wrote, Ty. We did it. That was a good one. We got our new rigs that are still working, so that's a positive. We were able to manage that technology, so look at us go here, Ty. Such a jam-packed episode. I forgot to mention all of our wonderful sponsors. We talked about Fantasy Points Media Group off the top. Monkey Knife Fight, obviously.
Lights are going to turn off.
Yeah, no doubt. We got to keep these motherfuckers on, pay them bills. Monkey Knife Fight, promo code TNFF for an instant match on your first deposit of up to $100. Love them. Go check out the player props. Good stuff going on for all sorts of sports over at Monkey Knife Fight. Trophy Smack, level your shit up. Level your league up with Trophy Smack. You can get a free championship ring with our promo code TNFF on your purchase of a trophy or a belt. So you've seen it in some of our previous shows. I usually have the belt rocking for the show. Really, really nice little units. And the trophies are so customizable as well. It's unbelievable what you can do with some of the hardware at Trophy Smack. TNFF will get you a free championship ring with the purchase of a trophy or belt. Last, but most certainly not least, our newest sponsor. I think this is like our first mention of our newest sponsor, and that would be Underdog Fantasy. We're a little bit late to the Underdog party, I will say, Ty. All of our buddies have been doing the Underdog thing for a while, partnered up with the pod, and we decided it was time. Shout out to Andrew from over at Underdog. Great guy, great guy. I had met him previously, and then, now he's working for Underdog, so it just seemed like a seamless little transition over as well. And our promo code, it's the same deal as the Monkey Knife Fight one. TNFF will get you an instant match of your first deposit up to $100. Really excited about this partnership. There's some really cool ways that we can share the games that we're jumping in with Underdog, as well as the best ball opportunities, Ty. We're going to be getting heavy into the best ball stuff real quick, and that's Underdog's bread and butter. They came into the scene really hot last season, and that was on the back of their best ball drafts. They did a great job. Platform is beautiful to navigate, looks great. It's functional as well. Like, there's not that many fantasy football platforms that marry functionality and aesthetics, and these guys do it really, really well. So
guys like Hayden Winks, I believe Josh Norris from formerly of Roto World also there. So they're bringing some studs in there, and guys I really respect their work as well.
Yeah, so go check it out, TNFF, and be on the lookout on our Twitter accounts, because we'll be dropping some best ball drafts that you can jump in with us throughout the off season. Yeah, I like it. I'm super fired up for that. So big thanks to them over there. And then the other logo that Ty was pointing at there is Viridian Global. Go check them out. We talked about it earlier. You got the True North merch there. You got all the other brand merch there. Get one of these crispy chapeaus. Actually, I don't think this one's in the catalog. This is one of the older models, but we got a newer, fresher one up there for you. And we're always looking at some new designs as well. So ViridianGlobal.com, as well as you can find them through our site at TrueNorthFFB.com as well. All right, Ty, any party shots for the people tonight?
Nope, maybe I'll tweet out some hit rate stuff. We didn't get to that. We definitely have a lot more to cover on the wide receiver front.
Yeah, and that's like the offseason is just getting started. We've got sophomore wide receivers to dive into. We touched on Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle there. Tons more of those guys. We got some potential breakouts that we want to talk about as well. So lots more on the docket. Keep her dialed to the TNFF pod. Make sure you are subscribed to that YouTube channel. And that's where you're going to get most of our work, as well as at TrueNorthFFB.com. You can see what all the crew is doing. So until next week, thank you very much. Peace.